Okay, so I will kick things off this morning for our guest talk with Dan Miller. Dan is the CEO and founder of Steward, a really cool lending platform for farms and ranches to access funding for operations, for infrastructure, for the important work that they are doing. And Dan has a really interesting background in alternative financing tools. And also, we share a childhood home space on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. I grew up sailing there with my dad, and Dan grew up along these same waters in the Chesapeake Bay region. So that was a really fun to learn about his origin story of becoming interested in sustainable agriculture and aquaculture. So Dan, thank you so much for joining us today, all the way from London, I think, which is where you are. Are you in London now?
In London, yeah. Getting ready.
In
Just
London.
done an afternoon tea, getting ready for dinner.
Yeah, nice, nice. Well, thank you so much for joining our Climate Farm School community to share a little bit more about Steward and the work that you're doing now to support sustainable and regenerative farms and food systems. And yeah, I think our Climate Farm School audience, we've been talking a lot in the courses recently about all the different layers of support that is needed to make this transition happen. And I think that, yeah, the work that Steward is doing is really interesting. Some folks might be familiar, some folks not. So I will pass it over to you to just share a little bit more of an intro and then kind of take us along with like what's current in your work. And folks will have lots of questions. So I imagine if questions are welcome throughout, let us know, or we can kind of, pause at the halfway point and make it more of an open Q&A and discussion.
Great. Well, thanks for the intro. Glad to be here. As she said, my name is Dan Miller. I'm the founder and CEO of Steward. And Steward is really created to provide values aligned capital to regenerative farmers and for food systems investments. So in ag, policy drives the capital and the policy drives large commodity production. So if you're doing conventional ag, selling through the multinational supply chains, there's a lot of support, there's a lot of capital, a lot of subsidy. They name it a million different things, but there's resources towards those types of producers and towards those types of systems. The value gets sucked up by the intermediary corporates, but it's still a supported market that's protected. The second you're outside of that, regional supply chains, heirloom varieties, value-added products, you're really cut out. You're really on your own. There's very few options for capital available. And the real challenge is without capital, you can only do so much in agriculture. And I think, you can start, but you can't really get to the scale and effectiveness needed for stability and for real growth. So the personal connection to Steward is really what drove me. So I think the Chesapeake Bay link it's an amazing link because when anyone has it, it goes very deep. But it's the largest estuary in America, and it is a beautiful ecosystem that people fall in love with. And I grew up in this ecosystem. My mom's family has been farming on Eastern Shore of Maryland since 1800s. She left the farm. I grew up in Washington, D.C., which is on the western side of the Bay, and my descendants have been in that region for generations. So it was always a sacred and important place that people enjoyed, but then was being destroyed and deteriorated with nitrogen runoff from chicken farms and building runoff and poor land use and dredging and just everything possible to try to destroy the ecosystem that had existed there for tens of thousands of years. And so what I was always interested in trying to figure out was how can you support the people, producers, the businesses that are operating in alignment with a net positive ecological impact? How can some of these depressed rural communities that are planting every square inch but feels like there's no growth, no opportunity, no investment, how can they get resources to do things differently? The region on the Eastern Shore of Maryland is all commodity at this point. 99% of the acreage is corn, soy, winter wheat, broiler chickens. That's it. Almost impossible to find fresh vegetables. Very hard to find seafood and shellfish. Bizarre, but the stuff gets sent up to Fulton Street Market in New York. It just gets shipped into these supply chains. And so you have this amazing resource that is just squandered in policies that haven't been supporting the restoration of the Bay. So I grew up, save the Bay is what they would always tell you in school, and you go visit it and you're supposed to figure out what to do with it. So that always sat with me. But the solution, at least that led to Steward, came from the other side, from growing up in Washington, D.C., living, and my family's in commercial real estate development. Through that work, starting to do my own development projects and meeting a chef out of Baltimore named Spike Jurdy, who was really the leader in regional sourcing in the Mid-Atlantic. So he was the first person who tied together the kind of producers to the product to the place and those regional connections. And so he really focused on all of his purchasing going to regional businesses directly to producers,
Mm,
over 150 producers in one restaurant, not
mm,
even purchasing citrus for cocktails, not having olive oil, having nothing that he could not source within the watershed. And so, what that really strict discipline created was all these amazing supply chains that didn't exist otherwise. One
mm,
that was the one that made me understand the need for Steward was around fish peppers, which was an heirloom pepper the Chesapeake Bay used mainly for seafood, thus called fish peppers, had been forgotten, lost, was found with some seeds in a barn. A grower started growing it, found spike. He started creating a hot sauce out of it, actually a hot sauce built for oysters, so to support the local
cool.
ecosystem. And then on the restaurant, all the tables at Woodbury Kitchen, instead of like Tabasco, which is just the generic and puts money into some, I guess a family farm, but probably not their pocket.
Mm.
This was a investment in creating a local supply chain for a product that didn't otherwise have a market, create the production of it, and tell the story of the region. And so it was these types of amazing supply chains I started to see. But when I started to speak to the producers who were growing these products, assuming that they had access to capital, they're selling products to well-known chefs who are buying everything they can produce, they're being celebrated in press, like they have to be doing okay. And then quickly you realize they don't actually have access to any resources. Even with market demand having shifted, people spending more and more on traceable agricultural products, the availability of funding was unchanged. It was as if it was the same as it would have been decades ago, maybe even worse than it would have been decades ago. And so that was where I really saw that mismatch of consumer demand and interest in regional food systems, in ecological solutions, in farm to table. That money was buying some farm products, but it wasn't actually funding the core infrastructure of production needed. And then you had same the growers that were creating those products at a market demand. They didn't have access to capital. Traditional bank programs, USDA programs didn't fit for them. So the goal with Steward was how do we take those two markets, kind of broad-based consumer, retail, kind of discretionary capital, and then broad-based regenerative farmer network, and link them through a financing platform. I, previous to Steward, was the co-founder of Fundrise, which was the first real estate crowdfunding platform that
Mm,
came out of a desire to raise money from local residents for neighborhood scale real estate projects that I was developing. And so the desire for me has always been how do you find the right investors for the project instead of changing the project for the investors? And almost
mm,
every source of capital that exists out there, managed funds, private equity, venture capital, the traditional sources people think to go to, are just return driven, no matter what they say. They're paid for return, they're focused on return, and the return expectations they have are too high and too much control and just too complicated to really fit. And so the need was how to build a different market that had values that was aligned, that really could design around the needs of that producer. And so
mm,
what Fundrise taught me was how to build the online platform for raising money online, how to find all these really complicated regulations that we could use with the broad online marketing. And so I learned the novel way of doing online investment. But the idea for Steward actually came even before Fundrise was launched, even when we were doing those real estate projects where I started meeting the chefs. So I had the idea in my head of, okay, can we aggregate these communities? Can we build a broad platform that lets those people participate? And so what we
mm,
did with Steward was we focused on credit. That was the main difference. It was the base product of land, money to buy, land, equipment, infrastructure, secured assets, which is kind of fundamental to any sort of economic market lending against assets. That didn't even exist for regenerative farmers. So the need was fundamental. And so what we provide at Steward is we are a commercial lender. We're a non-bank commercial lender. We source projects, mainly word of mouth and referrals of regenerative farmers across the country. We underwrite them as a normal lender would underwrite for financials, but we also really focus on agricultural practices. We have a requirement that they follow certain agricultural practices, regenerative practices. And so we're focused on, values, ecologically driven producers and getting them the resources they need for them to take that next step. And by being, flexible capital source, that is directly distributed online to our network of values driven participants. There's no other middleman, there's no intermediary, there's no bank, there's no government program. It's a fully like private market, impact driven, but private market solution. So if we can come to a deal that makes sense to the producer, we can then make the loan and sell that directly to our platform. And it's that type of customization and flexibility that's really the need. Regenerative agriculture is about adaptation to place. Products are different in place, growth cycles are different to place, markets are different. And so that commoditized system of 10,000 acres of soy at this price sold to these markets, it doesn't work in regenerative agriculture. And so you need a modified system that is bespoke, in not that every deal is totally different, but the consideration of what the deal needs to look like and the terms of it and the payments structure and whether interest is accrued in the beginning and then amortizing, that you need to be flexible. And so generally financing is a take it or leave it situation. Here's the loan products we have. You have to fit in the box. If you don't, it's not going to work. And so our goal is, how do we design it the other way around, design the financing for the producer and then distribute it to people who care about the benefit of that producer, are hopeful for their success, and therefore be willing to be more flexible in terms, but market rate. So we lend around prime. Prime is 8.5% right now. So maybe, prime to 1% higher for equipment loan, or prime minus 1% for a real estate loan. But our goal from the beginning is we need to build an actual capital market where people are lending money, earning a reasonable return, that borrowers are getting money at fair terms. But the world of regenerative agriculture has unfortunately been slotted historically in the charitable camp. It's like it can't compete. It just needs grant money, concessionary money. That's good, but how many people can give away money? Not that many people. And so you have a very small market of a few donors and foundations that people become dependent on. We're trying to build the everyday person market of somebody who says, yeah, I have $10,000. It'd be great. I'll put it in this loan. I'll make 8% on the loan. That's a great net return. That's better than a lot of other products. And I see the impact. And it's a really transparent model. So we just try to be that conduit where it's capital into project, interest and payments flowing through. All we charge is a 50 basis point, 0.5% servicing fee to lenders. So they fund a loan at 9%, 8.5% goes to them. We're just trying to create as transparent and simple of a model of money to producer, pulling it back. So we're really trying to build that network that enables broad participation in this market, but also be the interface for the producer who doesn't want to navigate the market. They don't understand financing that well. And a lot of our work is around that, advisory guiding of these projects. So this point, we've funded 95 loans, about 30 million total. 17 of that was just the past 12 months. 12 of that was just the past 6 months. So it's really picking up. Now we're funding a lot of regional infrastructure. So we've gone from not just producers, but on-farm processing and now shared processing. That's a huge need. We even funded Woodbury Kitchen, the restaurant reopening after the pandemic. We helped fund them with some equipment and improvements to get back up and running. So for me, it's full circle. Producer, processor, and sale. They all have to be connected. The economic exchange has to be integrated between them. And once you start tracing the product through to end use and back, and you're flexible, you realize you can actually encourage the growth in these networks. You can actually build viability for these producers and these processors. So what I'm most excited about our work is not just the validation of there's a lot of capital who's comfortable funding this stuff at reasonable returns and a lot of businesses who can borrow and succeed at those returns, but now actually getting enough money in the hands of these producers that they can prove the viability of regenerative agriculture on price point, on product quality, and start to chip away at the narrative that it can't compete and it's not serious and it's just a wish, when in reality, it has always been the dominant form of agriculture and it will eventually become it again when we use up all the resources.
Amazing. I just want to jump in real quick, Dan, and just say it's so interesting and perfect timing to hear about this model that you've built with Steward, because our part of our climate farm school community that's here just spent the week last week at Piscinas Ranch in California and talked to the owner there, Sally Calhoun, about her model of financially supporting regenerative agriculture. And it's sort of a few different legs of a stool of philanthropy that she's using to infuse into the regenerative food system, then investment capital through Cienega Capital, but not traditional venture capital, with very different expectations about returns and timelines. And then just having Piscina's Ranch as a demonstration for profit farming operation that's ideally just like self-sustaining and standing on its own. And yeah, and I feel like this is another different leg of a stool that is allowing regenerative farms and ranches to have that pathway towards yeah, independence, viability, successful business operations. Um, and yeah, I just think it's just like a unique slot that we haven't yet discussed of what you're doing. So yeah, just wanted to acknowledge that. And I feel like people will have a lot of questions about sort of the how and the results that you all have seen. But I also find it just exciting that people who want to support with whatever limited capital they might have and put their money towards investments that are in the regenerative farm space could potentially do so on the lender side, which normally we might not feel empowered to do if you're not in the like big access to capital space. So I'm curious to
Yeah.
hear a little bit more about like how big or small can some of these crowd lending
Yeah,
options
that's the
be?
key. So the key element is it's digital direct distribution in that everybody can create an account, log on, fund the loan. Some people put $100 into a loan, some people put hundreds of thousands, some people have balances in the millions. So I think often when people think of the kind of like crowd lending model, they seem small. What's most important to me is the direct. So it's people's direct discretionary capital and they're putting it in themselves. How much they put in depends on what they have. And so from the beginning, it's everybody's on the same terms in the same transaction in different ratios. We just made,
Mm-hmm.
for example, $1.3 million loan to a rice mill in Missouri. They grow regenerative rice and other grains. We funded the purchase of the rice for the whole harvest. It'll be milled over the course of the year and sold. And we did a 12-month kind of amortizing loan. So it was a 9.5% loan, 1 year term, fully amortizing. We raised 1.3 million from 246 people in 43 minutes. So we had as little as $100, as much as 150,000. And all of that
Mm.
was from one email, zero marketing spend, no effort
Whoa.
other than here's an email. And so you show the depth of that engagement, like people excited to put money out to earn a return, but like excited about the product. And I think that's where when you provide a competitive product and that's values aligned, I think that's the market that is ignored.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you've got the
Mm-hmm.
charitable money where there's no consideration, and then you've got the aggressive return money that is just return oriented. But most people fall,
Mm-hmm.
there's a middle where it's like return matters, but so does the caliber of
Mm-hmm.
the entrepreneur and their values and
Mm-hmm.
the actual business plan. And as long as I get something decent and I'm protected, I'm fine with that. So unfortunately, the world, as it often is in the US, is very stratified. So it's either one or
Yeah.
the other. And we're trying to look at that blended of return and impact, but you don't have to give up return entirely to get impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really exciting to hear, especially I mean just the one email short amount of time, just like make it happen. Um and yeah, I'm curious to hear maybe just a little bit more about some of the recent loans that you all have made, including that one that you just mentioned in Missouri. But yeah, are there any sort of emerging trends? Are you I feel like the Karen Spring Mills example is one worth spending a little bit of time on. And then also thinking about like, is this all happening on land-based farming operations, or are you also looking at the sustainable regenerative ocean farming aquaculture space as well?
Yeah, we'll look at anything. We actually just looking at a uni business. That's basically you do, wild
Oh,
harvesting sea urchin and then feeding them algae, and they're trying to build like an aquaculture business out of it. So we like the weird stuff. We like the unique stories,
yeah.
and that's where it began for me. Unique, products appropriate, suitable to place that have a unique supply chain, and that the value can be created out of that. So we're motivated very broadly. The first
Mm,
loan we made was to an urban farm in Detroit. So it was a farm on a tenth of an acre of land, a side lot, expanding to two
mm,
acres of land, went from 10K revenue to 150,000 in 3 years, and
mm.
proved like the viability of that type of model. So we started very
Wow.
small. I felt like I needed to understand how small farms work before jumping into the big. I think a lot of people like, let's go right to the huge farms and help them convert. Like that's so hard. It's extremely hard to fundamentally shift your practices on thousands of acres of land. So my view is always
Mm,
let's support the producers that are already doing it and let's help them grow more and be successful and prove out that this works. And so most of our loans, 90% of them are existing regenerative producers growing. They've got markets, they've got products, they need equipment to grow, they need land to grow. Like they've established what they're doing, and now they need to expand that. That could be new land. We're about to make a $600,000 loan to a farmer of 17 years experience buying their first piece of land in Virginia. So they've run other people's farm, now have their own, and instead of leasing land, they're purchasing land. So that's like finally they're getting on that ownership curve. We're going to fund the land purchase. We're going to fund build out of infrastructure. They've got a little. They're going to grow some grain in addition to market garden. They already do. They already have like a pizza event thing. So they'll kind of have like farm stands. So these kind of diversified regional enterprises. We're also now working a lot with processing. So I find processing infrastructure very interesting because the real consolidation issue is in the processing. Like everyone's seen all the stats. 4 or 5 firms control 80% of pretty much every agriculture market. That's where the margin is being extracted. And so until you have a producer friendly or the producer owned alternative system to get the process or product process to end market, you're never going to have viability at the farmer level because they're never going to get the reliable higher margin income stream that's needed to sustain it. So we're working with a group of ranchers in Montana, 3 fifth-generation ranching families who've come together to integrate their own small individual direct program to build slaughter, value-added processing, and a direct-to-consumer brand to sell with a butcher shop and restaurant in downtown Helena. So they just got their C of O last week. They're opening this week. Only 2% of the meat raised in Montana is eaten within the state. Most of the product is just shipped out to Colorado to Greeley and just sent everywhere. So mainly you're not eating Montana meat in Montana. It's just a really bizarre situation where what they're known for is actually not what's available, but that's because of the consolidation of the processing. And so this will be producer owned, fully vertically integrated to end use. And then they're also rotating animals on grain and they're integrating with other uses. So these types of models I love because the value of that economic system from the land to the end sale at a steakhouse is all retained within the value chain of the producers and the people tied to that community. And I think it's those types of independent models that can provide higher incomes, more stability, better jobs. That's the higher multiplier investment that everybody knows that versus a Tyson plant. Like for some reason, there's not an understanding that they're not the same, that just like dollar spending is not the same. The quality of that spending is also very important. Similar to that thread of regional value chains, Cairn Spring Mills, I think is probably our closest collaborator. So they are a stone mill in the Skagit Valley, Washington, created in 2016 to originally buy farmers and economic development officials to try to bring higher value to rotational grains. So the Skagit has 5% organic matter. It's always been managed regeneratively, really. And as part of that regenerative rotation, they rotate grains. But historically, you're getting no value for those grains and they're a loss leader. So you're disincentivizing good soil practices because rotational crops that are healthy for soil lose money. So it's a big ask for people to just take a loss just because they get a terrible price for a product. So they created this flour mill with the idea of directly sourcing identity preserved grains, stone milling it to keep some of the brand and the germ, and selling a direct product to bakers and chefs that was distinct and differentiated. And it ended up getting picked up by some of the best known bakers in the country, celebrated by home bakers, and just consumer demand showed that it's a better product. Not only is the ecological story important, but the net result is it's a better product with a sense of place, more flavor, more nutrition, all of that. So they kind of took like, how do you make money in flour, and realized, well, not all flour is the same, and we can create a craft distinct version of that market, just like other products have done. So amazing business. 2016 is when they started. That's when I started Steward. So a long journey for both of us. We met about 18 months ago. So recently started working together. We financed, we've made 3 loans to them thus far. One was a $2.3 million loan in the last December, so they could purchase all of the wheat from the area farmers at harvest. That's the difficult thing about their model, right? They don't buy spot commodity product. So they actually have to source and secure that supply chain at harvest, hold it, mill it, and sell it throughout the year. So that was done similar to the rice mill, 1-year loan, 9.5% interest, fully amortizing over the 1-year period with interest and principal. And that way they can pay all the farmers at closing, or at harvest, mill it and sell it throughout the year. And they don't have to tie up their operating money in that. They used to have to use their operating money to like figure out how to buy the grain and sell it. And you can imagine trying to run a business where your inventory and operations are just getting sandwiched and you lose all, you just have too much money tied up. So that helped them stretch their inventory, finance it separately. We then made a 500K loan recently for them to build a palletizer. So they were hand packing pallets, which sounds like the small farm type of work that would be celebrated, but when you're doing it every day, I think you realize that that's a real pain job to do. And so they got a palletizer that helps them on labor, that helps them on efficiency, that helps margins. And so that was about taking their existing smaller mill that does 8 million pounds a year and just making that the most profitable unit it can, increasing efficiency of that system. But that flour mill is up to 8 million max capacity. They're almost at capacity now. So they obviously need a new facility. They'll need bigger capacity. And instead of a small mill, the goal is let's optimize. Let's build at the regional scale where we can source at enough volume that we can have a price point to supply wholesale contracts and start to really hit the broader food service wholesale market, because it may not be on parity with conventional flour, but it'll be close in price. And if you value at all anything else, then that can start to supply real volumes. So that facility will have 80 million pounds a year. It will buy from about 40,000 acres of land. So true watershed scale impact. It's going to be east of the Cascades. So it'll be near Pendleton, Oregon. So, west of the Cascades is known better, but the real production basin is east, where you've got huge operations. And so that can give them bigger supply, bigger volume, bigger acreage. In the past year, we've spent, tons of time putting this deal together. So it'll be a $40 million facility. We'll do a loan of about 25 million, which is more than our entire last year volume alone. We're only able to do that 25 because we're tapping into some rural incentive programs that match funding. So of the 25, we actually have to hold only 5 for the long term, and 4 of it gets matched through another program. So not only are we unlocking money through our audience, we're able to leverage that to then further unlock other sources of funding that can make these types of deals possible. And next week, I'm actually going out there with the founder of Cairn Spring again to visit the site. We're actually doing it on tribal land, the Umatilla tribal land. So we're meeting with the tribe again and their economic development leaders, and checking out another site in Idaho to do really a regional network of mills. So these types of projects are just, it's so passionate for me, because you see it's like just about to turn the corner on watershed scale impact, fully traceable, enough volume to actually fit into the bigger purchasing needs, and start to make a dent that can prove the viability of this model. So I feel like it's gone from when I started in 2016, I wasn't convinced about the viability of sustainable agriculture. I didn't even use the term regenerative. I just used sustainable. It wasn't clear if these farms could actually afford commercial financing. You're told these are kind of hobby farms and they're not competitive. So there's a narrative that they're not real businesses, they can't compete, and they need lots of subsidy. And what's been amazing to discover is they don't need the subsidy. They just want to be treated like a normal business. They just need resources to grow something that people want to sell, and they can sell and buy it. And really what they need is just access to resources like anybody else does. And the more we can treat them like a normal business and less as this like separate thing that needs to be different than everything else, the more they can just get on with growing the every day-to-day business. So we've made 95 loans. We've only had 1 default out of that. Our loan loss ratio is like 0.15%. Maybe it goes up a bit, but this is not like a huge default, crazy high risk category. It's secured lending to businesses that have demand. And so there's just a perception issue around risk and like competitiveness that's totally wrong. And I've been happy to find that it is like good economics and good ecology and good product quality all are linked. And so the strengthening one actually strengthens the other. And at the end of the day, consumer demand should drive the market. And so the goal is like, how do we build that type of independent system?
Yeah. Wow. That is really cool to hear. Thanks for sharing those examples. And yeah, the Cairn Springs one really just ties it all together so nicely with the ecology, economics, and product quality. Julia, go ahead and ask your question.
Well, I have a few that have been piling up, but one of them is, I guess I'm curious about like the intake process for the projects that you're choosing to support or the farms or like companies that you're choosing to support in terms of like, are you seeking out places to partner with and figuring out what their business needs? Do you have people coming to you and basically filling out applications of some kind with like a justification for kind of their, history of success and where they're looking to expand? And have you found, are there certain projects that you have like rejected in the past, and what are the reasons for those? Or and then to kind of expand off of that, like as Steward continues to grow as a company, are you looking to get into like different parts of the supply chain basically beyond like just the farm? And it sounds like with the Washington project, it sounds like it's getting more into like processing and distribution, but like even beyond that, thinking about like other small businesses that might like source from farms and like they're looking for loans. Or I'm just curious kind of about
Yeah.
the
So we're
growth for
definitely very
Steward.
broad. We'll look at
Yeah.
anything. We've actually made some recent loans to CPG companies who regeneratively source. So we lend to them to buy from the farmers. Like one was buying buckwheat, another was buying olives and capers from. So anything that like is a traceable ag supply chain will support. We even work with a grant writing partner who we help cover the costs for the grant writing on behalf of the borrower. So we even provide some funding for like service providers, even to the
Oh,
extent that
wow.
like everyone is needed in that network. So definitely we'll look at anything. Our like our intake process is not much different than a normal lender. Somebody submits loan application, mainly inbound referrals, mainly inbound inquiries. It's just a natural word of mouth product. Marketing's great. I'm not against marketing. It's just farmers, it works for them, and then they'll share it with someone else. So there's a natural flow of trusted leads. They'll submit a loan application on our website, mainly talking about their experience, their existing business, bottlenecks, future growth. So we just want to get a sense of like who they are. Then we'll do an initial screen, start further diligence around like financial analysis, site visit, agriculture analysis, that kind of stuff, and then through an underwriting process, have a sign off from our underwriter, account manager, ag diligence, and the broader review. So ultimately we're diligencing the project. We're responsible for the underwriting. We're responsible for the servicing. Our lender network is reviewing and can look at all the information, but how are they going to know, we're in this every day. We're the direct partner. So we view it as like our responsibility to take very seriously. So this isn't like an open platform. People don't just like post deals. It's like us vetting, structuring, underwriting. And then it's just about hiring more staff to broaden that. Most of the loans are directly sourced. We now have some partners where they're referring to us. So we have a few technical assistance providers who refer farms to us. They have tons of relationships with customers who need money. There's also a few nonprofit loan funds who've started to refer deals because they can lend 25K or 50K, but when someone needs a $500,000, that's not possible for them. We also have a partnership with Advancing Eco Agriculture, John Kemp's input provide consulting company. So they advise farmers on regenerative transition, and then when they need to buy biological inputs, conventional banks will fund them. So that's a situation where we're working with bigger traditional conversion operations, traditional in that they at some point were tended to be conventional and they're coming this way. They're normally in the path, but they're moving towards it. And there we're working with an on-the-ground advisor. And so I tend to view the projects that require a conversion, we want an on-the-ground technical assistance person there. Like you can't do that remotely. You can't do that from a distance. So those deals require more wrapping around, more oversight, administration. But most of our deals are already regenerative farmers that we can verify their practices ourselves. We don't rely on third-party certifications. In the loan documents, they're signing a requirement to follow practices, not to do certain practices. So we take it upon ourselves to do that work. And I think that's probably where the most skepticism's happened recently. I mean, regenerative agriculture was not a known term 5 years ago, and it's already gone through a boom and bust cycle as a term. Like it almost is at this point used by so many corporates that I don't even know if I like the term that much anymore. So it's frustrating that a term that should mean a lot can get diluted so fast. So I tend to take the view that like you got to do your own homework and you got to be comfortable yourself with the practices, and any sort of certification standards never have the level of oversight that people think or hope.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I'm just coming off of reading the Atlantic article about Alexander Family Farms, and I was like, ah!
I know.
Like
And
regenerative
that's one
organic
where
certified,
it
but
creates a lot of
yeah.
confusion, right? It's like, okay, are they comping normal? Are they better? Or is the whole thing bad? Is it totally
Hmm.
restructural? And that's even part of the
Hmm.
conversation we're having internally today around,
Mm.
when we're doing direct farm, it's a lot easier. But now we're also funding a CPG company
Hmm.
who's sourcing from a few farms,
Hmm.
or so
Yeah.
now we're having some indirect supply chains, but we still need to be responsible for those indirect supply chains. So
Hmm.
it can be a challenge. I generally find like scale size is the main element related to practices. Like I originally thought big was bad. That's not true. Like it's not about size. Certain like regenerative livestock, bigger is actually easier. The more land you have to rotate the animals actually can improve the SLR. So, but when you're talking about bigger dairies, bigger row crop, like that tends to be where the corners tend are cut more. So the like large family farm tends to be a market where people think it's still cute, but actually it's more industrialized than they think. And I find a lot of the tell all like exposes seem to be around these like you think they're a cute little operation, but actually they're huge. And
Hmm.
your expectation of what a farm is different. But that's
Hmm.
the type of thing. And reading it, like I'd have to visit for myself. Like I don't feel like
Hmm. Totally.
there's enough
Yeah.
information for me to
100%.
be conclusive, but it certainly muddies the water and make you realize how important reputation is. And
Yeah.
how do you recover from those types of scandals? So it's made us think of like, okay, maybe we need to have our own monitoring program, like with more required oversight. It's
Mm.
unfortunately the only way I've found you can trust it is with a directly traceable supply chain.
Yeah.
The second you're
Yeah.
like in Whole Foods and you're like, oh, it's ROC certified, it must be good. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter
Yeah.
unless you
Yeah.
know exactly that operation. And so that's where
Hmm.
we're being more careful around that regional integration. And that's why working with the processors, I love processors are real gatekeepers. That's a natural nexus who they can control the supply of product, they can control the end volume. But yeah, I think
Mm.
that article made a lot of people ask questions and then ask questions about the dairy
Mm.
model. And then that's another question of like,
Hmm.
is the model even make sense? And we
Mm.
ask a lot of those questions ourselves. Like,
Hmm.
can this type of agriculture ever truly be regenerative? And there's
Hmm.
certain
Hmm.
products we were speaking with
Totally.
someone last week. They're like cotton as an apparel product. It's hard to ever see it actually being regenerative versus hemp and other apparel. So like you have structural
Hmm.
elements of our agricultural system that may not work at all, and the
Hmm.
implications of
Hmm.
that are pretty enormous. And we're just
Hmm.
in the early days of like understanding what truly regenerative looks like. I'd rather be on the line of really strong than like in that middle territory where
Yeah.
you lose a little bit and I'm it's made us think a lot.
Yeah. Totally. Same here. Claire, go ahead.
Oh yeah, let me turn my camera on. Hi, thanks, Dan. This was really amazing, and thanks, Lainey, for facilitating. I was wondering, because you already have so many loans, and your focus is on kind of making the financing work for each project, how do you kind of scale Steward as you increase the number of loans and also like the monitoring that you said and due diligence, while still like keeping that focus on the project level?
So we have a really efficient business with 9 full-time staff, fully remote. Most people are living in like Asheville, North Carolina, or Ann Arbor. So we have a team that's not like a high cost based system. So most financial services firms out of New York and these expensive places and partners are trying to make millions of dollars, and so they just ignore any deal that's less than tens of millions because like it's not even worth their time. From the beginning, ours was like, how do we build a distributed low cost model that can plug people in fairly inexpensively? So our cost per deal of underwriting is like probably like $500 to 1,000. It's not very high. So we can do 100K loan. Like that's probably a loan where you're just at like covering costs if you have some over allocated costs. Smaller than that, we actually has created the Steward Foundation, where we're now making lower interest loans to beginning and BIPOC farmers like in that category. So I do think certain markets are non-economic. I think farm loans of 50K or less, like it's just non-economic. There's just the time and effort can never be graded. But if you're doing $10 million loans for facilities, there's lots of income there that can support it. So for us, it's like, it's core to who we are that we want broad access and we'll invest in that. But many businesses just give that up and move on. But for us, it's like the purpose of this is to encourage more farmers. What was the first part of your question too? Then on.
Oh, I'm just wondering because, yeah, with a team of 9, like as you expand the amount of loans and doing like the monitoring.
Yeah, how do we? Yeah, so that was
sure.
like March. So then the way I've been, and Lainey and I were just talking about this recently, you do need like a labor pool. There's a deep need for a lot of labor pool. This is not an automated business. We'd never pitched that this is going to be automated underwriting. Like every VC-backed firm loves saying how it's going to be AI automated. Like never. This is like people and human, and it's supposed to be specific. So there, if we're going to have thousands and tens of thousands of farms, that looks like a lot of staff. And like I don't really want to have a company of like hundreds of underwriters and that kind of thing. So we've been working on a model of like a network of service providers who can provide some of those core functions. So we have a grant writer, for example, we refer projects to. He's gotten over $6 million of grant funds for Steward borrowers. We're not directly making money, but that's bringing money to the deals, which is meaning that there's more money available. We can lend more. The businesses have what they need. I was just speaking with a marketing agency yesterday. Similarly, was helping one of these regional direct consumer businesses drive sales. More sales means more revenue, which means more borrowing capacity. So I think over time, like the skill sets are there. There's no gap in skill sets. People who can underwrite loans, so many of them, so many trained by Wall Street that don't want to do that at all, actually. So like, it's not a gap of skills. It's a gap of those people being in contact and connected with the businesses that need them. So I do think over time, if we have a big enough pool of farms, we can start to build a bit of a labor marketplace and like build those resources, because I do believe in like crowd-based underwriting in the sense, not that everybody underwrites the same, but out of 100 people, 3 of them will be sophisticated, knowledgeable people in that sector, and they can provide an analysis and do work. So I do think we could build a bench of people that are like affiliated service providers that are independent contractors who have specialty that can then provide a lot of that labor. We're meant to be like a network. We're meant to be a platform. We end up having to do more than that because we had to build our own, we had to make the system work, but we don't need to be the direct relationship to every deal. Like we're now looking actually a few projects in Australia through a partner, and they're the local technical assistance service provider. Like we're not going to be the relationship manager for every farm in a foreign country we have no presence in. So we're already seeing our model there being the financing, structuring. So I do think we can take different pieces. But the first version of us was fully end-to-end, from farmer relationship all the way through to loan underwriting, all the way through to legal documentation, to distributing the loan, to building the technology system that even manages that whole system and payment processing, and building the regulatory model. So we have like a crazy amount of vertical integration now, but there's no other way. And then over time, we can figure out which are core functions and then which are functions that can be served by others.
Yeah, as
Amazing.
somebody that works
And
for the AI powered VC, I totally understand. So thank you.
yeah, and I'm super excited about the potential of some climate farm school folks joining this bench of skilled labor to support the regenerative farms that you all are also, engaging and connecting with. And I think that's potentially a really exciting idea, because people are coming with a lot of skills, a lot of interests and passions, and connecting more to like what regenerative farming looks like on the ground in different locations. And yeah, just having a lot of valuable skills and services to provide. And so it's really interesting to hear the grant writing example of that plugging into the crowd lending system. And a lot of folks with like marketing or legal skills. And it's like,
bookkeeping is a classic
network.
one. Like no farmers have great bookkeeping, 0 of them.
Yeah.
They're not interested in it really either. And for bookkeepers, that's what they do. It's like, you know how to do it. It's not that complicated. It's a fairly straightforward business. So those types of like administrative and business services, the interest isn't there, the experience isn't there. So I think where we'll specialize initially is on related financial services, right? Grant writing connects to making loans, bookkeeping is financial reporting, which relates. So I think that's our core module. But certainly the sales and marketing module is critical too, driving sales growth, technology, branding, direct to consumer. And then the production stuff is actually the least needed. I think that's where everyone's like, oh, we got to teach these farmers. Like, there's lots of great farmers out there. They would all produce more if there was market demand for it or they had the capital for it. And they talk to each other and they befriend each other. Like, yes, should be more incubators and stuff like that. But the producers are already in those worlds. So the agricultural advisory stuff is actually, we find where the least need is, because there's already lots of technical assistance groups. There's YouTube videos. Like, those communities have found ways to communicate. It's the non-ag stuff, which is really the gap.
Yeah, definitely. That definitely resonates with some of the small farms that are popping up around me here in Sonoma County. And just to be like, I'm going to start small because I need to get enough customers to justify my costs, and I'm doing it without any other kind of financial support. So yeah, those people are skilled and would do more if they could. So that makes a lot of sense. And are there any states in particular, Dan, that you are like operating on or focusing on or not operating in? I feel like I remember Alyssa saying in the past that you might not have been working in some states yet, but how is that expansion going?
Yeah, so our business, we have two parts of our business. There's commercial lending, and then there's distribution of the loans. The commercial lending part is very lightly regulated. Private commercial loans in most markets are exempt activity. So, 45 of 50 states, it's exempt. In 5 states, you have to file small paperwork. Of course, California is one of those states, naturally. So we're in the process of applying for a lending license there. If we want to do more than one deal a year in California, we'll have to. So there's minor, regulatory items, but ultimately we can pretty much lend anywhere. Or if a project comes in one of those states, we just tell them, like, we need an extra month or two to put a little filing together. So we really go where the demand is. The Pacific Northwest has by far been the biggest market for us. Washington, Oregon, Montana are the biggest 3. So probably 60% of our volume is those, that Northwest corner. And we put Portland as our headquarters at the beginning, but we're a remote team. So it's more of like a signatory. It's just like the ecosystem in Oregon and Washington is just amazing. It's just incredible. The depth of capital that wants to support it, the interest in purchasing, the chef sourcing, like it's the closest thing you have to really balanced regional supply chain. So not surprisingly, I think we've been pulled into that market where some of the more pioneering projects are in that market. A lot of our lenders are in that market. So, more success breeds more success. But I mentioned we just made a loan to a farmer in Missouri, in the boot heel of Missouri, which is even rural for Missouri. So that was like our team member from St. Louis was like, oh my God, that is very rural location. So this is tiny town, they're the regenerative farmer. There aren't other resources. They don't have lots of local customers who are doing artisan versions of everything. Like, it's a different market. But they're a great producer who's been one of the first organic in the country, and it's an amazing story about their operation. So we will support them. So we'll do a loan anywhere, but definitely being in markets where they're not quite on their own and they maybe have a bit more policy support or a bit more customer support, or there are some angel investors, like, it just makes it easier. And I think if you're trying to raise capital for these deals, not just the lending we're doing, but equity, trying to raise equity capital for like a rice mill in Missouri, I mean, honestly, there's nowhere to go. Like, everyone else in the community has all their money in ag. They're not going to put money in another system. There aren't people who've made money through other entrepreneurial ventures who can recycle it. So that, like, Seattle Angel Investor Network, those types of things that have nurtured a lot of these projects don't exist. And Karen Spring Mills is an example. Their cap table is like 60 investors, and it's all these different angel investors, different high net worth investors, some family foundations. Like, they just scrape it together. And so could that business have existed and survived but for that region, but for having the proximity to the location? I'm not sure. So I do think there's a reason why the Northwest has been the most advanced in these concepts, and probably will be the place that proves them. But then those models will be replicated elsewhere. So that, vertically integrated producer livestock to final finished good model, like, we have 5 or 6 other projects that are doing similar. So I I like working everywhere. Today actually was just I shared a project in Tasmania and Australia, which is so cool. Like that's the stuff I get excited about, the international ones. I visited a farm in Greece in December that was making olive oil from 2,000-year-old trees, which is just incredible. And so like that's the stuff I love, just like these amazing stories of these operators on their own in far off corners of the world, but like the same values, same obsession. And then people realize they're not on their own. I think that's people feel lonely in this work. They're in a community, they're stuck on a physical location, they're not able to interact. But it's like they're all just siloed. It's just the physical nature of the work that they get stuck somewhere. But I'm just connecting Cairn Spring Mills actually today with a oat grower who's building an oat mill in Minnesota, because Cairn Spring Mills is thinking about broadening their product line, and oats were actually originally grown in the Skagit Valley. And so that type of exchange where you've got a oat grower who wants to do processing, who can speak with a processor who's specialized in wheat and now would expand to oats, who's built a consumer brand. And that's a melding of knowledge, right? One's got the production to sale and the other has the processing to branded package. But they don't want to, it's not I'm going to compete with you or buy you or screw you. It's like, we're in our own ecosystems, we have our own projects that are being done differently, but we can learn from each other. So I love that exchange of information and like crossing between them. So we're operating definitely at a much broader geographic level than most groups.
Yeah.
Most groups are regionally focused. So we see like a lot across the country. That's probably what I enjoy most.
Yeah, that's really, really exciting. And just out of curiosity, with the international projects, are the like farms and producers you're engaging with in Australia or Greece, are they engaging or like coming on your radar because they're looking for similar lending models in their respective countries, or are they just like, wanting to have a shared network that is global?
Yeah, the unfortunate thing that you realize, and I'll put the Greek farm in the chat because I just like it's the best. And they can ship the olive oil to America. You have to get 6 bottles at a time, but it's worth it.
Oh, nice.
Can I put it in the chat? Sorry.
Oh yeah.
So
Totally.
for these international producers, there we go. For these international producers, like everyone's operating in an American designed world. Like the commodity export agricultural model was U.S. policy forced on everyone else, forced as like a foreign policy model. Like when you read that like food is a weapon and we're gonna import oil to export food, it's just like these bizarre like political balance of payment kind of framework. So the trade structures and the corporatization and that global supply chain system was a US built model. So every other market has the same issue. Lots of money available for commodity ag plugging into that global supply chain, even less money available for other sources. So the incredibly challenging environment in the US is probably still better than any other market in the country, because you still have entrepreneurial capital and like that American mentality of just like people willing to take a bit more risk. In these other markets, there's nothing available. They're totally stuck. So there really are no resources. Yeah, there's some grant money, but they're otherwise stuck. So this farm, as just an example, it's called Evmelia. It's in the Peloponnesian coast. Olive oil from trees up to 2,500 years old, which is like astonishing. Socrates actually lived in the region. He used to gather herbs in the forests and mountains next to it, which is just amazing piece of history. Those trees were actually alive in his era and still producing olive oil. So you have just incredible heritage story of a product. They bought the land, or it was a family piece of land. They took over, invested, built some farm stays, started making olive oil. But they really need to take the next step. So they really need to like get to a size where it can sustain itself. One of the biggest lenders on our platform at Steward is a Greek American who moved back to Greece recently. He's been wanting to support regenerative farms in Greece. And so he was introduced to this farm, and he came to us and said, I think this is a great project. I'd like to lend some money to them, but I don't want to have to do the whole loan. I'll commit to a certain amount. Can Steward consider doing the rest? So this was just totally based on a direct referral from a funder. And he's from the country. He lives in the country. He's committing some of his own funds. Like I visited the operation. It's fun to visit, but I have to see it myself as well. And so you're just like, this is a project that has a lot of elements that I can trust about it. And then when we actually looked at the stats of the farm, 60% of their guests, of their email list, of their farm stays are Americans, and 60% of their online orders are from the US. So this business in rural Greece is actually already being funded by Americans indirectly through
Mm-hmm.
purchase of
Mm-hmm.
products and through farm stays. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
the global funding network, like it is US dollar outbound. That's how the world works. It's US economy funding investment elsewhere that tends to be the catalytic capital. So I think our model will work very well where we can lend money in these foreign markets. We can raise it from our US audience. From a regulatory perspective, we can do that without much challenge. And then we can slowly like broaden the pool of what's available. I'm very intrigued to figure out how our first international project will be received. Like, are people more interested, less interested? Do they have less trust or more? I don't know. I'm not sure. I have no way of telling whether that's appealing. But thus far, we found like it's narrative that matters. Someone who funded Urban Farm in Detroit also funds a project in Oregon because it's the same issues and the same challenges. So I'm intrigued to figure out that issue. But the need for capital is global. The geographic borders are just the regulatory borders, but the need is everywhere. And so, yeah, I hope we work in a lot of markets. The every market has its own challenging. So we're not going to be everywhere overnight, but I'd love to do a few projects just to showcase that there's a global need.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally. That makes sense. And yeah, thank you so much for explaining that. That was and the narrative piece is really amazing and important. I feel like to me in a values aligned way, I'm like, oh yeah, I really want to support this urban farm in Detroit, expanding their acreage even from like half to 2. And I really am like called and invested in the narrative of 2,000-year-old olive trees that have been productive and, a part of that in situ environment for that long. It's just, those stories are really powerful.
And that's what we found. Like most of our users on our platform fund multiple projects. Like very few people will fund one, and that's it. So it becomes like a product type, and that's been the benefit. Is like money's flowing into places it wouldn't otherwise because people who maybe came in for one project are now funding others. So that's the real network effect of our platform. More capital brings more deals, which brings more capital, and they each tend to sustain themselves.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dan. I realize we're at time, and I feel like I could just keep on chatting, but we'll pause the story sharing here for now, and hope that we can all just stay connected with you and with our network of Climate Farm School alum. And if it's okay to have any follow up or reach out via email, just let me know, and I can share.
Yeah, you can, and I'll put my email in the chat. I'm fine for anyone to reach out directly, so don't hesitate.
Amazing. Okay. Well, yeah. Thank you so much, and hope you have safe travels to the U.S. in another couple of weeks, and look forward to following along and hearing more about what you're doing, what Steward is up to, and hopefully meeting it in person at one of these amazing producer sites before too long.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Lane. I appreciate the opportunity, and I enjoyed speaking with all you, and look forward to keep the conversation going.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. And thanks everyone for being here. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Lainey. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
Thank you.